Will, welcome back to the podcast. How you been?
Thanks, man. I've always loved talking to you. I'm good, but same old stuff. Just busy with patients and excited for this new book. Life's good. I'm blessed. I'm thankful, and in such a mad time with so much of people's lives are turned upside down. I'm very conscious of the little bubble that I live in, and talking to people online and living in the countryside and with my kids that are homeschooled. So I'm very privileged in that way, and I'm thankful. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah. I mean, life hasn't changed a whole lot either. It's working from home. I mean, in one way, it really has. Like we talked about before we hit record, I have a new daughter who's almost a year old. So that changes things. I'm a new parent, but it's been incredible. And even given the pandemic, it hasn't really changed a lot because, that first year it's about, connecting as a family and slowing down and forming those bonds. So it's been beautiful. I'm really grateful too.
Me too. Yeah, that's awesome to hear.
So the new book, Intuitive Fasting, loved it. And
Thank you.
just to jump right into that title right off the bat, fasting typically is something I think of as very, scientific and prescriptive, and, a certain number of hours you're going to be eating and then a certain number you're going to be fasting. And then intuitive fasting, that flips that right on its head. So talk about that title and what's so different about this form of fasting.
Thank you. So my day job, my focus is talking to patients. So we started one of the first functional medicine telehealth centers in the world. I mean, I've known you probably that whole time. It's like over a decade ago. And so that's been my main focus. And from that, you're talking to people 10 hours a day, and you're really start seeing how you can use these amazing tools in wellness in a way that works for everybody, and looking at the context of how everybody is different. And that's the heart of functional medicine. So all the books, like when I wrote Ketotarian or Inflammation Spectrum or this book, they're all a ripple effect of my clinical practice. So the title and the whole concept in this conversation that I'm having with the reader in the book is there's several layers to this. So on one layer, on a superficial layer, as a writer, it was just a play on words, like a prefix int, intermittent and intuitive. That's really not the main reason, but I thought it flowed well from a visual standpoint. But the next level is it's a paradox. You're right. On one level, how the heck could fasting ever be intuitive? So to the layperson that saw that, it would be like, okay, let's figure out what this is. But the whole book is explaining the context of what I'm talking about. This is that on one level, when someone's metabolically inflexible, fasting will be not intuitive, because they are going to be hangry and have insatiable cravings, and their blood sugar is going to be all over the place. There's going to be chronic inflammation, which will blunt hormonal receptor site signaling and neurotransmitter receptor site signaling. So fasting would be the antithesis of intuition. But the goal is, and when you hear on social media or this movement that's happening within the wellness space or food space, is intuitive eating. And I wanted to have a conversation about it, and from a functional medicine standpoint, because for some people, look, there's a certain sect of the population where they can truly have authentic intuitive eating right out of the gate. They're not dealing with chronic health problems. Their hormones are balanced. Their labs look great. Food's never been an issue for them. Their weight's never been an issue. Their health problems, they've never had health problems. That's not the majority of the human race. So beyond that certain sect of people, intuitive eating sounds nice, but for it to be something more than just a vapid soundbite that sounds sexy on Instagram, we need to actually show up for ourselves to gain metabolic flexibility, because metabolic inflexibility or metabolic rigidity, being in that sugar-burning, hangry, fatigued, hormone imbalanced mode, that is proverbial noise on a physiological side of things. So that's going to drown out that still small voice of your intuition. So the discernment, to know truly what your body needs and to feel great is going to be really hard. It's clouded out with all that noise. So is it stress eating or is it intuitive eating? Is it insatiable cravings or intuitive eating? Is it hormone balance or intuitive eating? So cravings can mask themselves, or any sort of imbalance in the body can mask itself as intuition. But metabolic flexibility, which through flexible intermittent fasting, we can get that and many other tools I talk about in the book. Once metabolic flexibility is fertile ground for authentic intuitive eating. So that's really what the book's about. It's getting to a place of intuitive eating, because when you have proper hormone balance, when you have proper satiety signaling, and when you have proper gut-brain axis communication, when you have balanced inflammation levels in the body, that will give you that deep knowing of, I eat when I'm hungry, I can go longer times without eating because I am more satiated and metabolically flexible. You have stability and you have a stillness in the body to have that clarity. So that's the thought behind the book.
You mentioned a term there a couple of times, metabolic flexibility. And I think before we get deeper into things, let's describe in detail what that is. And you mentioned fasting can help get you there, but let's talk about the details of how somebody over time can build that flexibility.
So when I say that, and if just that word flexibility, that's really what I really want to focus on for people, because oftentimes in our space of wellness, we say metabolic flexibility and we only are referring to keto adaptation or being fat adapted, which is part of it, right? It's definitely part of it. So let me back up a little bit. Most people are in various forms, varying degrees of sugar burning mode. We all burn sugar, that's normal, but metabolic inflexibility or metabolic rigidity is being stuck in that as your only option to burn and burn for energy. So people, it's like kindling on a fire. You're going to create some light with kindling, but you have to keep having 6 small kindling meals a day to maintain that light, maintain that blaze, that energy throughout the day. Or not, if you don't, the light will go out and people get hangry and their blood sugar is unstable and they're dealing with all those problems that I mentioned before. There are different degrees, relatively, of quality of kindling. There's the clean kindling of healthy carbohydrates, whole food carbohydrates, starches, carbs, sugars from whole foods, but it's still kindling nonetheless when that's your only option. It's going to create some energy, but it's going to be short-lived. And then you have the dirty kindling of the standard Western diet, which is, refined garbage and processed grains and refined sugar, all of that stuff. But both of those are kindling. The alternative is burning fat for fuel. So it's a log on the fire. It's more sustainably burning. It's more slow burning. You're going to have long-lasting energy. But the term metabolic flexibility is the ability to burn both. So there's a time and place to burn clean kindling. And there's a time and place to burn fat for fuel. So that's the balance. That's the homeostasis that I want people to find for themselves, because that, again, is proper hormonal signaling. That's proper gut-brain axis communication, proper brain hormonal axis communication. There is a synergy within the body that on a physiological level will allow that intuition to really speak very clearly. And people will be able to have a healthy relationship with food, a healthy relationship with their body. They'll have what I refer to in the book as food peace. And that's, to me, my opinion is, that's authentic intuitive eating. That is coming from a place of health and really knowing what makes your body feel great and having the discernment to tell the truth, to tell your body the truth. You'll be able to trust your body, basically. And so that's what metabolic flexibility is. And through inflexible intermittent fasting, that's really a good way to, the way that I built the protocol in the book, it's these vacillating, ebbing and flowing fasting and eating windows, which is, in my weird mind, I think of it as this yoga class for your metabolism. When people first start yoga, at least me, I still suck at yoga, but I get better. The more you do and practice at it, the better you get. And that's how I see these 4 weeks that they cycle through, is that at first it's going to be like, what the heck? This is not normal. Like, yoga is not normal. This is unnatural. But the more you do it, the more you show up for the practice, the better you get, the more flexible you get, the more you can rest in those poses. And that's how I see these fasts are. They're poses for your metabolism to get stronger and more resilient.
And you mentioned the 4 weeks you talk about in the book. When you get through that and you have that metabolic flexibility, how do you find that balance day to day? Somebody like you who's, been living this for whatever period of time, how do you go about finding that balance and, taking in the right amount of carbs and then, going into fasts and how long you stay in fasts? And Just figuring out navigating that balance.
I think it's showing up and using your life as an experiment, using your life as a lab, and be your own N of one experiment, because we're all created differently. And that's the heart of functional medicine. It's bio-individuality. And I'm having this bio-individual conversation throughout the book for the readers that I've seen over the years clinically monitoring patients, is there's so much uniqueness within the human race, and context matters when it comes to these tools. So I gave the 4-week protocol to, you're never doing anything for too long, but you're going to learn about yourself. You're going to learn about your body and your health and where you feel the best. You're also going to learn about your relationship with yourself, your relationship with food. And there's tools throughout this book that's so much more than just fasting. It's just learning about your body. So part of that practice, this proverbial yoga class for your metabolism, is as you're doing it, you're growing in mindfulness, you're growing in awareness. And that's fertile ground also for intuition on a mental, emotional, spiritual level. So it's using this time of flexible intermittent fasting and using food as medicine as a mindfulness tool. So that's not just the fasting and the physiological side of things when you gain metabolic flexibility. Yes, that is very much fundamentally important from an intuitive eating standpoint, but also mindfulness is, and present moment awareness and using eating and using fasting as mindfulness practices are also very important too. So those are two muscles in a way that the more you use it, the better you're going to get with it, and the more you're going to be confident in it. So in 4 weeks, they're going to be able to see measurably how they gain metabolic flexibility, because there's a quiz in the book that I adapted from questions that I ask patients, and they can retest that themselves at the end of the 4 weeks to see how well they've improved in metabolic flexibility and just feeling better. But they're also going to be able to go back and think about where they felt the best, which time restricted feeding, which intermittent fasting window, which type of fast over those 4 weeks. Each week is a different one. Where do they feel the best? And then maybe after 2 or 3 cycles of the 4 weeks, depending on where their starting point was, I want them to adjust the protocol for themselves as they grow in intuition. So some people will know, I feel better with this fast. Some people better than this one. And that's not just the fasting window, to your point of what you said, even the carbohydrate side of things. So I'm pairing these flexible fasting windows with a clean ketogenic diet that's cyclical. So it's kind of in many ways a continuation of the conversation that I started with Ketotarian in my first book that I wanted to have in a deeper way, because they're two sides of the same coin. A clean ketogenic diet mimics fasting. And so I talked about intermittent fasting in Ketotarian, but this is a bigger conversation, intuitive fasting. So clean carb cycling is one of those tools that it's customizable for the person that's reading the book. So maybe around heavy workout, or for a cycling female, they're increasing clean carbs. I'm walking them through all of this. So it's not a matter of saying fasting's bad for this group of people or fasting's great for everybody. It's like, oh, how are you using this tool and learning about your body, growing in intuition?
And Will, when you're working with a patient and fasting is a totally new thing to them, how do you start them off?
Honestly, exactly how I talk about it in the book. So in week 1, it's a 12-12 fasting to eating window. So you know this because you read the book, but for people that are new to this, like if we're talking a 12-12, which is so under-loved, I feel like, because it's so simple, and like it's 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. or 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. That's 7 to 12 hours a day that you're eating your food. Big eating window. And then you're basically not eating too late at night. A couple hours before bed, you stop eating. So you're fasting through the night until you break the fast at breakfast in the morning. So that allows a lot of leaning into. It's a nice, gentle starting point. But I'm pairing that in week 1 with a ketotarian diet, which is a high healthy fat, moderate protein, low carbohydrate, a mostly plant-based, clean ketogenic diet for week 1, pairing that with 12-12. So this is leaning the body gently into metabolic flexibility, because you're actually starting to upregulate and support those pathways of the fast with the foods. So you're starting to become more fat adapted and metabolically flexible with every meal. So, as I said in the book, maybe depending on the starting point of the person that's reading the book, they may want to repeat week 1 for 2 weeks. This is self-paced. So that's exactly what I do with patients, is that we don't have to rush this. This is just meant to be sustainable. This is meant to be integrating feeling great in your life, not just a fad crash plan that you have to push through. So meet your body where it's at. There should be a grace and a lightness and a measured flexibility to even the pace of the protocol. So I think week 1 for some people could be 2 weeks, could be 3 weeks for some people before they lean into week 2, which is a bit of a deeper fast. It's an 18-hour fast in week 2. So that's about a 6-hour eating window, like 12 to 6 p.m. And you're fasting after 6 p.m. through lunch the next day. That's week 2. For some people, that's going to be a breeze, so they can go literally from week 1 to week 2 with no problem. So I hopefully did enough of that conversation throughout the book to know that they can adjust the protocol accordingly based on their experiences in their life.
And then when somebody is just starting out and starting with that 12-hour fast and then 12-hour eating window, you mentioned how they're going to begin to become a fat burner during that phase. What are some of the other changes they're going to experience with just doing such a simple, again, often underestimated, but only being a 12-hour fast? What are some of the other changes that are going to occur?
So I call that each week, it's a different word that's symbolizing the research that I'm talking about in that week. So 1 is reset, and 2 is recharge, metabolic recharge. 3 is cell renew, and 4 is hormone rebalance. So that week 1 body reset is what I called it. It's exactly, I'm really exploring the research around how it's really resetting a lot of things. When it's paired with a clean, mostly plant-based, ketogenic, like Ketotarian diet, that is mimicking fasting. We're starting the metabolic, we're starting to put the log on the fire, right? We're starting to lower inflammation. We're getting blood sugar more stable. A lot of things can happen in just 1 week with that. Now, one specific thing, which is a whole section in that chapter, that is really in many ways a gut reset. So the research around allowing your body, specifically your gut microbiome, time to repair and to reset is really exciting. So our microbiome has a circadian rhythm, just like our cortisol does, and just like many of other hormones have. So certain colony forming units of bacteria, certain neighborhoods in this microbiome metropolis are higher in the morning, and then they go down as the day progresses. And then some colonies of bacteria increase in the evening. When we're always eating and we're always snacking, and especially inflammatory foods that disrupt the microbiome, that impact the balance of that microbiome metropolis, that whole circadian rhythm of our gut microbiome is thrown off. So by this 12-12 eating approach, something very simple in week 1, we're giving it, really, I call it body reset, but the subtitle of it based on the research is a gut reset. That a simple 12-12 fasting eating window is a great way to reset the circadian rhythm of all the trillions of bacteria of our microbiome, which is upwards of 100 trillion bacteria. I mean, to put that into perspective, there's only 10 trillion human cells. I mean, depending on the study you're looking at, I mean, there's some microbiomes can change that, but upwards of 100 trillion. So that's about 10 times more bacteria than human that we all are. And this influences biochemistry. This influences how hormones are instructed. This influences how neurotransmitters are produced. This influences how inflammation is expressed in the body. So it's profoundly important just in week 1, but that's just the foundation of the weeks to come.
And how quickly does that microbiome change? You mentioned week 1, but does it happen within the first couple days, or how long does it take?
It happens within the first couple of days. So there's studies to show just within a couple of days of someone changing their diet, the microbiome starts to shift pretty quickly. It's pretty cool. But the larger, obviously, I mean, the larger healing of the gut's going to take more than a week for sure. But the microbiome starts to shift. The gut garden starts to recalibrate based on the foods you eat and the fasting you give it within a couple of days. So within the week 1, you're making some exciting changes in your microbiome.
And you stated a couple times now that when somebody's doing this week 1, they're going to be on your Ketotarian diet, which is a higher fat, low carb diet. I just want to highlight the point that, we're talking about this right now from that perspective. somebody could be doing the 12-hour eating window, 12-hour fasting window, and then eating, a ton of carbs during that 12 hours. So let's kind of talk about the difference there between somebody following your eating plan versus somebody that's still eating a lot of carbs during that 12-hour eating window. And is there still benefits to people that do consume a lot of carbs?
Yeah, there's absolutely still benefits of the time-restricted feeding. And first, just to clarify that, time-restricted feeding, or TRF, is a type of intermittent fasting. And you can get super wonky with the phrasing of that. There's certain people within the fasting community that don't consider time-restricted feeding really a form of fasting. To me, it's two sides of the same coin. Are you time-restricted feeding or intermittent fasting? It's just, they're both two different ways of saying the same thing. So it's a type of intermittent fasting. And the studies that have been done, a lot of them at least, had to show the efficacy of fasting. Can it stand on its own? If you don't change the calories that you eat, if you really don't change the foods that you eat, does eating in specific windows or time-restricted feeding, specific eating and fasting windows, will you see an improvement? Studies have shown time and time again that yes, you will see improvements with just slight adjustments flexibly of your eating and fasting window. So that's good for research. And that is still, and in some ways, it's very promising for people who don't want to change the foods that they eat, really, but just want to take their health whatever they're eating to the next level with something like this. Absolutely. The eating window you'll see benefits from it. And there's many studies that I cite in the book that show that. But I would say this. As a functional medicine practitioner, I am not an advocate to fast your way out of a poor diet. Not that, clean carbohydrates is a poor diet, but just, it depends on what the quality of foods that you eat. That matters just as much as the fasting, in my opinion, in the long term. Does that mean you can move the needle in the short term? And studies have shown that? Yeah. But we're not a research study. What's the long-term benefits from a health standpoint? How can you integrate this long-term to see lasting long-term benefits? That's where my mind goes to. So why not eat in a way that is very complementary to the fast? If you get your blood sugar more stable, that will make your fast a lot easier. And you'll make your quality of life, even when you are eating, a lot more enjoyable. You're going to feel better. So it complements the fast, but it also complements how you feel and your blood sugar stability. And it lends itself to fat adaptation. But as we've talked about, you and I have talked about in years past, but I'm not for someone to be in ketosis all day, every day. So bringing in a cyclical ketotarian approach is the way that you use this tool in a way that works for everybody. So there are some people, of course, that need and use ketosis long-term for specific health reasons. I'm not talking about those people. But the average lifestyle, let's better your life person that has hormonal imbalances or wants variety in their life, wants flexibility in the foods that they eat, a cyclical approach like this is really an amazing tool to consider because they can increase their clean carbohydrates for many different reasons. And that's the clean kindling on the fire. So there's a time and place for that. So that's really what I'm talking about.
And just to give us a little bit of perspective on what that cyclical nature might look like, for you, Will, what does a typical week look like? When do you decide? I know every week must be different. And again, this is an N of one. This isn't, do what Will's doing. But just to give us an idea of what that could look like, how do you go about cycling in and out of ketosis?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I mean, I've done the 4-week flexible fasting plan in the book. I've done that many, many, many times. I like it. It's something that I've implemented in my own life for years. So this is everything that's in the book is something that I've just born out of my own personal experience and my clinical experience. So I honestly think that people could cycle through this 4 weeks indefinitely because it's so flexible and so modifiable. So cycling through those vacillating eating and fasting windows is something that I do all the time. Today, I'm doing a 18-hour fast. So I drink tea in the morning. I like Earl Grey tea because I talk about this in the book, but the bergamot, the citrus from oil from Calabria in Italy, that's in Earl Grey tea, which is a black tea, has been shown to support autophagy pathways, which is the cellular recycling cellular renewal, anti-aging pathways. Fasting does that as well, and the clean ketogenic diet does that too. So all three together really support those healthy anti-accelerated aging pathways and healthy cellular renewal pathways. And then I break, like today, I'll just tell you, I broke my fast at lunch with a Ketotarian lunch. It was a salad with avocados, with sesame seeds on it, with a salmon and extra virgin oil based dressing. And then I had, it was these almond flour, like Ketotarian, low carb pancakes with coconut yogurt. Because I basically condensed, I had my lunch and breakfast at lunch. Because again, this isn't about chronic caloric restriction. I'm eating amply. I'm eating until I'm satiated. And then I'm consulting patients the rest of the day. So I probably won't eat. If I do eat a snack, we have sea snacks in the clinic here. So I have like the seaweed snacks, which are baked in olive oil. And I love the onion flavored ones. And then for dinner, I'll have something similar, a Ketotarian meal, maybe with a smoothie. I love the recipe in the book that's like a spicy frittata, like basically a pizza. That's vegetarian keto, basically. And then I love avocado fries. Are so good, like sliced avocados with almond flour and this chipotle aioli dressing. I have that. So that's a typical day of that eating window. So I'm eating enough calories. I'm eating intuitively within these 12 to 6, this 6.5. I'm not super strict about having to end at 6. So it's normally like at a 17.5 hour fast for this day. And then tomorrow I may do an OMAD, which we do in week 3 in the book, or an almost OMAD, as how I explain it. This 22 to 2 fasting to eating window. And I'll do that. I do that many times of the week, but I'll cycle through this stuff. It's not arduous. It's not punitive. I'll just kind of show up for myself in that day and let my instinct and my intuition lead me.
That's what I was going to get to. You talked about maybe doing an OMAD tomorrow. You kind of decide in the moment, coming back to the intuition, how you're feeling that day and whether you should eat or not.
Yeah, totally. And I don't want people, that's the science and the art of all of this. The science is the research and how to practice, like what does the scientific literature say? What does the health benefits say? How do we get people's labs looking good as far as my job is concerned? Yeah, all that stuff's important. Certainly it's important. But the other side of that coin is the art of it. The art is the intuition, very much so. So the more you gain metabolic flexibility from the science, the art will lift itself up in equal proportion because you'll have an inner knowingness of like, okay, I need more of this, less of this, based on any given day, how much stress somebody's under, how much sleep you got, how a heavy workout do you have in that day. If for women that are cycling, where are you at in your cycle? All of this stuff, you have to keep practicing, like that yoga analogy that I kept saying. The more you practice this art of wellness, the more you're going to get good at it. And it's going to be a second nature. It won't be this thing in this book that you have to memorize. It'll just be so written on your heart and your being that it won't be even the thing you think about much.
And you just quickly touched on women there going through their cycle. Let's open that up and dive deep into that subject and compare what fasting might look like for a man versus a woman.
Yeah, this is such an important topic, right? I mean, we get this question probably so much. I'm sure you get this question all the time. And anytime you talk about fasting, it's like, well, I heard that women shouldn't intermittent fast. And that is that broad sweeping statement that is said flippantly. But the reality is context matters with this too, because this may be earth-shattering news, but not all women are the same. So it's very over broad sweeping and reductionist to say, well, fasting's bad for women. Because yes, it's true that a lot of fasting studies have been done on men and mice, but other studies have been done on women. And how can we extrapolate the exciting research and apply it in real life? That's science and the art that I talked about. So context matters when it comes to women. Not all women are the same. There's so many different, which women are we talking about? Is she struggling with PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome? Is she struggling with insulin resistance? Is she struggling with weight loss resistance? Is she struggling with chronic inflammation? Is she struggling with autoimmunity? That's a completely different outcome with intermittent fasting, any type of intermittent fasting, than a woman who doesn't have those things. She's leaner. She's maybe going through a stressful time in her life. Maybe she's not sleeping well. Maybe she has slightly sluggish thyroid. 2 different outcomes, all women. Many different outcomes, all women. So it's just very important to look at the individual and say, yes, of course, some women tend to have higher kisspeptin levels, which is a signaling molecule that tends to make most women more sensitive compared to men with fasting and things that mimic fasting, like a ketogenic diet, because both are increasing beta hydroxybutyrate, that ketone body. That has a lot of the benefits. It has a lot of the anti-inflammatory, brain boosting, fat burning benefits. But it's not good to say, it doesn't do anyone any good to say, well, it's all good or all bad. Like fasting's bad for women. It's like, oh, how are we using this tool? The same analogy that I would say with even working out. It's like showing up to the gym one day, you've never worked out in your life, and you try it and you work out really hard. You do too much on the first day, you feel really sore. And that's like saying, well, the workout's not for me. And anybody that's sore from workouts, that's equating that with, it's not for me. Well, it's like, how are you using it? Maybe you did too much. Maybe you did the wrong type of workout. But working out is good for people. It's just a matter of how they're doing it. So the same nuanced context conversation we should be having around intermittent fasting. How are we using it? Because you can leverage the benefits and use it in a way that works for you without using something too much, because more isn't always better. And that's true for workouts, and that's true for fasting, because these are all hormetic effects on the body. That's hormesis. It's these good stressors. Workouts is a hormetic effect. Fasting is cold therapy, heat therapy. These are all hormetic tools. These are good, but too much or improper use of any one of them isn't good either. It's that balance that I want people to find. So women that are cycling tend to do better with less deeper fasts around the beginning of their period and around ovulation. And that's not always true because there's so many different variables to consider, but I want people, as they do these 4 weeks and cycle through, they're going to check in with their body. And I'm reminding them throughout the book, check in with your cycle, check in with your cravings, check in with your energy levels, check in with your digestion, check in with your sleep, check in all throughout this time, to start to see, I need more of this, I need less of this. And as they get a rhythm and a groove as to like, wow, this really works, it's that intuition growing. So I generally recommend for women that are cycling to do less deeper fasts. And that's why we readjust it based on your menstrual cycle in the book. You can do lighter fasts depending on where you're at on your cycle. And every woman's cycle is different too. And they're increasing their clean carbohydrates on days 1 and 2 of their cycle and around ovulation. So that's to give specifics. At the beginning, it's going to be a little bit more like mathematics, but at the end of it, you're just going to eat intuitively. But it's under 50 grams of net carbs on the Ketotarian days, the lower carb, clean ketogenic days, and then 75 to 150 grams of carbohydrates on your clean carb cycle days. But you don't have to figure this out. For the person that's listening to this, you do it a couple times and then you just know, I'm adding extra sweet potatoes, or I'm adding fruits, or I'm adding some rice on my clean carb cycling days. It's a no-brainer. But it's a practice, just like that yoga class you have to do a couple times to get the hang of it.
Are there any specific groups, maybe people that are suffering from a certain condition, where fasting is contraindicated?
Not the way that I advocate it in the book. Because it's so flexible and so intermittent that it's not something they have to do. They're not doing too long. Long fasts, like long water fasts, dry fasts, these type of more, I don't want to call them extreme, but more intense fasting. Yeah, there's people that shouldn't be doing them, and they're for a specific type of people. The one group of people that I highlight in intuitive fasting that should discuss with their doctor and their eating disorder specialist are people with eating disorders, either currently struggling with the disordered eating or in the past. And even those people, I've seen countless of times over the years, they feel so amazing doing the protocol in the book. But I still want them to get the go-ahead, depending on where they're at in their recovery, because there are studies that show the intermittent fasting, even flexible ones, and any way of changing of eating can be a trigger for some people, depending on where they're at on their journey in their own specific case. So, of course, get the go-ahead from your doctor, get the go-ahead from your eating disorder specialist. But I'll say my experience with people that have done protocols like this, both clinically and also just anecdotally on social media that have done things that I've written about, they feel better than ever. Why? Because their blood sugar is more stable. They feel better. Their health's improved. Their brain is healthier. They're a lot healthier. Lower inflammation, increased BDNF, decreased neuroinflammation. All these things that I really want to be supporting, they're gaining for themselves through this protocol. That is physiologically really good to have a healthier relationship with food and the relationship with their body, because they're healthier. And they have more resilience as far as their health is concerned. And they're still working with their eating disorder specialists and everything, but they got the go-ahead. So other than those people, everybody else, it's very accessible for everybody.
That makes sense. And earlier, just a second ago, actually, you touched on water fasting and dry fasting. Are these types of fasts that you experiment personally with at all or find any value in?
Yeah, I've never done any considerable dry fast, so no on that. I know friends that have, I know colleagues that have, I know clinics that do experiment with that. I don't with patients. More than a day. A dry fast for a day, an OMAD dry fast. Yeah, I've done that before. But multiple day I haven't done personally. Water fast, I've done that, and can be very beneficial for people that have inflammatory bowel issues, people have different autoimmune issues, food reactions, food reactivities that are very out of control. Yeah, those water fasts can be quite resetting to the system. That's really not what I'm discussing in intuitive fasting, but on a clinical level and a personal level, I've implemented protocols like that in my life and for my patients.
Let's talk about what happens in the body physiologically when you go from what we talked about in the beginning, the 12-hour fast, and then stepping it up to, say, like a 14 to 18-hour fast. Somebody who's, starting to become metabolically flexible and they're feeling like they're ready for the next step. It's like, what benefits are they going to get from going longer?
That to me probably is a seminal event for people, because they're going from that 12-12 to that 16, 18, 14 to 18 hour window. And I want them to at least do one 18-hour fast in that week too, in the metabolic recharge week. The research there's actually probably some of the most research is done around those fasting windows, those time restricted feeding windows. I haven't added it all up, but I would assume from my research for the book, a lot of it is between that 14 to 18 hour eating window, because we're really working on improving cardiometabolic markers on labs. And, not everybody's measuring labs before and after to see that, but just the real life, does this improve my quality of life? Absolutely. The research points to that. So it's estimated that 50% of the United States is insulin resistant to some degree. Somewhere on that insulin resistance spectrum, from mild weight loss resistance, cravings, fatigue, blood sugars off, reactive hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, metabolic syndrome, prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, and PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. That's like on that spectrum. All of those things I just mentioned have been shown in clinical trials and research studies to be improved with these simple time-restricted feeding fasting windows. Pretty cool stuff. So just, moving your breakfast a little bit later, ending eating at evening a little bit earlier, not much of a change, can do amazing things for your quality of life. I've seen that clinically over the past decade too. But when we're pairing that with a clean ketogenic diet, you're amplifying the benefits exponentially, because you are mimicking fasting even when you're eating food. So that's happening because of the high fat, moderate protein, low carbohydrate macronutrient ratios of the ketotarian way of eating. So what that means is you're not stimulating insulin. You are being well nourished. Fat is very filling and very healing to the body. And moderating protein helps to balance out mTOR, which is a pathway that some of the research is looking at in the medical journals on the benefits of fasting, specifically to longevity and fighting certain types of cancers as well. But just overall, decreasing accelerated aging, etc. The moderation of protein is really important for this. So that's why a ketotarian diet works so well with these time restricted feeding windows. So mTOR, or the mammalian or mechanistic target of rapamycin. That's really the pathway that we're trying to balance it out. We need mTOR. It's important for muscle growth, etc., but we don't want too much of it, overstimulation of it. And a lot of people are always overstimulating mTOR because of the modern Western diet and all the things that we do to it. So that's what they're doing in week 2. They're starting to awaken these pathways and to balance out the pathways that we need balance, but also activate all the healing pathways. Because beta-hydroxybutyrate, this ketone body, it's known in the research as the 4th macronutrient. So we have protein, fats, carbs, and ketone bodies. And beta-hydroxybutyrate and other ketone bodies are being explored in the research as being this amazing signaling molecule, and which means it does really cool things for our physiology. It improves BDNF, I mentioned, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, actually encouraging the genesis of new neurons. It improves mitochondrial biogenesis, making new mitochondria. It lowers inflammation. It's like think of it as like a natural, like anti-inflammatory drug, but your body makes it naturally, endogenously. So it's this very cool signaling molecule that lowers systemic inflammation, like NF-kappa B, the NLRP3 inflammasome, the COX-2 pathway, which NSAIDs work on the COX-1 pathway. So it's very similar as this anti-inflammatory, but it's natural, your body makes it. And it upregulates pro-antioxidant pathways like the NRF2 and the AMPK pathway. All that to say is, I think it's summarized better than me rambling all those acronyms. I think it's Paracelsus said it best. Paracelsus, one of the fathers of medicine, he was known as the father of toxicology and the Martin Luther of medicine because he was reforming medicine in the late 1400s, early 1500s in Switzerland. He said fasting was the physician within. And all that weird, wonky, sciencey stuff that I just said, it's just summarized as it's this awesome doctor within that repairs and heals and resets and recalibrates and mends what is dysfunctional, what is broken. So that is, they're already tapping into that and awakening those pathways that have been dormant maybe for their whole life. They're really upregulating and supporting these healing pathways just in week 2, just with that. But we get even more of that in week 3 in the book.
Earlier, you talked about the Earl Grey tea and the bergamot in there and how that can help with autophagy. Is there any other adjuncts that you'd recommend to people to at least be aware of and maybe experiment with while they're doing their fasts?
Yeah, I love tea so much. So I had a massive section in the book about tea. I love writing about tea. I love talking about tea. So it's not just about the Earl Grey for me. I see them as like this really cool natural medicine cabinet in the form of tea that people can have based on what they want to focus on. So I love that section of the book because I think they're the perfect fasting adjunct, like perfect fasting tool because they curb appetite in many ways. So they make your fasting easier. They have really cool catechins like antioxidant polyphenols like EGCG and many other ones that are really beneficial at supporting the fast. They're actually enhancing that physician within in many ways. So I love teas. I think all different types of the green teas that I talk about in specific, like the gyro-kuru and the matcha and the sencha and the bancha and all these different types of teas that people can explore with and have fun with during their fast. Coffee has its place. I know that's controversial, but I think that depending on how you metabolize caffeine, and teas have caffeine too, but less caffeine than coffee. But if you are a fast metabolizer of coffee, having that during your fast can support lipolysis or fat burning and support that fast in many ways and just make it more enjoyable for people. And electrolytes, I think, are important too, that are supportive of the fast. So adding in some Himalayan sea salt and water, making sure you're sipping on that throughout your time-restricted feeding window or during your fast. So those are all things that I like. Now, the question is, people ask, well, can I add something to my tea or my coffee? Like, what constitutes the breaking of the fast? And I talk about this in the book, but I mean, look, I don't want to be super militant about these type of things because I don't think it's all or nothing. I think many of these things, there's such negligible amounts of them. If you're talking about MCT oil in coffee or ghee in coffee or clarified, butter in coffee or even collagen protein or some sort of protein powder, is that going to break your fast? The answer is no. It's not going to break your fast unless you're having copious amounts of it. there's so much studies looking at fasting mimicking diets, and you're having way more calories than what you're having in those coffees. Now, if you're having multiple amounts of them and they're calorically dense, that's a different story. But like one of them that has some calories, it's so negligible. If it makes your fast easier, then have at it. Maybe try not having it later on. The more metabolically flexible you are, you may not need that long term to fuel you, but in the short term, there's no shame in that at all. If you want to be a little bit specific on the sciencey stuff of it, like looking at the mTOR pathway, it is sensitive to protein, but is a small, like a scoop of collagen protein going to really mess up your fast and cancel out? I don't think there's enough evidence to show that. It's such a small amount. But if you want to err on the side of, I want to support these longevity pathways, I want to support autophagy, I want to support these stem cell pathways that fasting supports, I probably would leave the protein out, like the collagen protein or plant protein out. But the fats and the tea and the coffee are very supportive of that in many ways.
And you mentioned the MCT oil there. And other than helping keep us full, what other benefits does that provide?
So I love this section of the book too, because I love MCT oil. I think it's a good tool used judiciously, right? I mean, it can increase like GI motility and like upset your stomach if you have too much, but the right amount could be quite helpful because it's really clean fuel for your brain. I mean, it passes through the blood-brain barrier. It's very it behaves quite differently than the long-chain saturated fats. So it's a great fuel for increased energy. And look, it's supporting ketosis. My bigger, like more, if I'm being picky about things, I would want to get your body to produce its own ketones instead of getting these exogenous external ketones. But in the short term, if it makes your fast easier, I think it's a good, gateway to being metabolically flexible. I think it's a good tool to add to teas and coffees, and it's increased energy, supportive of ketosis. It is can help with curbing appetite, all that stuff. If that makes your fast easier at the beginning, then go for it.
And what about exogenous ketones specifically? Jumping right to that next step and taking exogenous ketones during a fast. Is that something you do at all or recommend with patients?
I don't do it. I have done it for experiments like on myself, but I don't do it regularly at all. I'm not against it either. I think if someone wants to do it, if it makes your fast easier, if you're into that biohacking stuff and you really know, hey, someone that's like, I really want improved cognitive performance. I really want to increase energy throughout the day. I think it's a great tool to consider. From a long-term like health standpoint, it's not bad. It's not bad to be on those things at all. They're known to be safe. But I want the body to be producing these ketones endogenously instead of manipulating. Because a lot of these exogenous ketone companies will maybe explicitly say this or inadvertently say this, is that you don't have to change the foods that you're eating. Just take this and increases energy levels because it'll raise your ketones, even if you keep your carbohydrates at like 500 grams a day. And in theory, that's true. I mean, they can, but you're not fat adapted just because your ketones are high. You are metabolically flexible when insulin is balanced, when blood sugar is balanced, when inflammation is lower, and ketones are there cyclically. That's fat adaptation. So you can manipulate physiology and make your numbers look great on a ketone meter, but is that really improving your quality of life long term? You may have increased brain function, but beyond that, like, what's the goal of this long term?
That makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of other benefits to be had. And to be honest, the simplicity and the fact that fasting is free, it's just such a simple primal tool. It kind of takes away from that.
Yeah, well said. It's completely free and it's really awakening these pathways. That is our birthright in many ways. I mean, researchers estimate that our genetics haven't changed in like 10,000 years. So these amazing things, in many ways, this physician within is decreasing the chasm between genetics and epigenetics. It's more in alignment with the biochemistry. So it's from an ancestral health perspective, it's decreasing the evolutionary mismatch, which I love that. And in many ways, I see that in patients. I get excited about it. I get excited about it more than they do sometimes, but they get excited too when their quality of life is improved. I get excited when like the labs and things improve, that they that are reflectors of why they feel the way that they do. It's really cool to see. And the human body is so smart if you just give it the time to recalibrate itself.
And Will, can you remember back to when you first stumbled upon fasting? Is this something you've been using with patients for quite some time in your personal life too?
Yeah, I've used fasting my entire career, for the past decade. But I've used it in my own life for about 10 years prior to that. So a long time. Since I was late teens, I've been doing it. So it's something that I've always seen to be beneficial. I grew up kind of a weird kid in the alternative health space. So it was always talked about. I think of one of the earliest books that I read in the late 90s. It was written by Jordan Rubin. Do you know Jordan Rubin?
I know of him, yes.
Yeah, no, yeah. So Jordan Rubin is a brilliant guy. He's partnered with Josh Axe and with Ancient Nutrition, and he started Garden of Life before that. So Jordan Rubin wrote a book in the late 90s. I don't know the year. I think it was probably 97, 98. It was like a paperback floppy book, and it was called Patient Heal Thyself. And he showed how he had Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, something like that, in the before and afters of how he reclaimed his health. And I was a teenager. I was a young kid reading this book. And that's when I first was introduced to fasting on that level. Like I've heard about it before then, but it wasn't something that I experimented with myself. So yeah, it's been a part of my life for a long time.
You mentioned having that book as a teen. How does a teen like you come across a book like that? Was it something your parents like passed
Yeah,
on to you, or were you
yeah,
suffering from a certain health challenge at the time? It just seems
yeah.
like
Weird
an
book to have.
interesting fit.
Yeah, it's really weird. So yeah, my dad was in the healthcare field, and that's where it came from. He had it, and my dad's partner at the time is Dan Pomp. I don't know if you know him or not, but he does a lot. He talks about fasting a lot too. So I've known Dan Pompa my whole life as well. So yeah, I was around some, strange people that were doing things like this before wellness was a thing. What it is now, it was still a thing, but it was not the industry that it is today. So that's what I was doing at like 16, 17 years old. Yeah.
It seems like just in the last couple of years, fasting has really taken the health and wellness realm by storm. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it is. I think that in many ways, research catches up with antiquity. I mean, look, if you look at Paracelsus, I mentioned the physician within 1400s, 1500s. If you look at Hippocrates, used fasting for his patients to cure ailments and to improve quality of life. If you look throughout traditional early medicine, all the fathers of medicine used fasting, or a lot of them used fasting. But even if you look from a spiritual religious standpoint, and anecdotally, they didn't have randomized controlled trials. They didn't have the scientific journals to look at the mechanisms and the science of it. They just saw it did really cool things for somebody's physical health and mental, emotional, spiritual health too. So if you look at with Judaism, with Yom Kippur and Tish B'Av, Islam with Ramadan, Christianity, Lent started out as a fasting period. You look at indigenous populations around the world, they did fasting. You look at many different cultures use fasting for spiritual and physical benefits. So now you're talking about thousands of years, and now journals are really saying, oh, look, like we know the science, we know the mechanisms, we know the pathways that how this stuff is working. So it's substantiating all this indigenous ancestral tradition that humans would have evolved with over time. So it's really cool to see that. And that's the trickle down effect. You get amazing studies, you get exciting studies, and then it goes into clinical practice, and then it goes into pop culture and all that stuff. So that's just like anything else, right? It's in many ways it's similar to any other health zeitgeist, like the ketogenic movement and paleo movement before then. To me, I see it as an like a zeitgeist of like this bubble of conversation that happens in pop culture. But even when the bubble pops in pop culture, the science will remain, the real life health benefits remains, and that's my focus as a functional medicine practitioner. Whether some people are talking about it or not is not the primary goal of it. It's cool because more people's lives are being bettered. That's awesome. But the day-to-day stuff still remains even when the light has moved on to something else, the next shiny thing.
That's a good point. And you kind of answered the other part of my question there, which was why now? And it sounds like it's because the research is coming through and trickling its way down.
I think that's part of it. And I think in many ways it's a continuation of the conversation. I mean, I think the ketogenic zeitgeist brought in this concept of beta hydroxybutyrate and ketones and this boom of exogenous ketones and this boom of MCT oil products and the boom of keto products that are out there. Well, I mean, the other side of that keto adapted, fat adapted lifestyle is fasting, because they're both two sides of the same coin. The more fat adapted somebody is, the more they just will randomly do intermittent fasting, not because they're even willing it, because they have that log on the fire and they can go further without food. So to me, it's just kind of a continuation of that keto conversation too, which in my opinion still stemmed from exciting research. Researchers are exploding on the far-reaching benefits of this. But the commonality between intermittent fasting and a clean ketogenic diet, or just a ketogenic, even if it's a dirty ketogenic diet, the benefit is beta hydroxybutyrate and other ketone bodies. And fasting specifically, it's also a break. So independent of whether or not somebody's in ketosis or not, it still is a rest. And I think the human body, just like so much, it's like, as I say in the book, as above, so below, there's so much noise going on in the world that I think there's a palpable knowing in the human consciousness that knows we need a pause. We need a pause. And many people say that this weird silver lining coming from the pandemic was this. Of course, a lot of horrible stuff is happening too, but the silver lining that a lot of people are saying is, whoa, I needed to slow down. I didn't even know that, but I was like forced to slow down. I think a fast on a micro level is the slowing down, a resetting of our human physiology. Because what's going on in the world today, even on an environmental level, we have this climate change and global warming and a lot of things happening. That's like an imbalanced environment, a disturbed environment, a disrupted environment, but a lack of balance. But on an internal level, on a physiological level, a lot of people are having climate change in the form of chronic inflammation and hormone imbalance. And that is like a physiological global warming in many ways. So fasting is a way to repair that and rebalance that and heal that physician within. So I think, yes, it has to do with research, but it's more than that, because research alone doesn't create a resonance. So I think it's this amazing fusion, this confluence of factors that has to do with research, but I think it's resonating with people because we know that our era, dripping in excess, our overdoing everything, and our constant satiation, our constant overdoing of more is not going to work for us long term, and it's actually backfiring in many ways in the form of chronic health problems and our quality of life. So I think fasting is a way to sort of gently reset and reconnect us with feeling great.
And the other aspect of that, Will, is that when you're fasting, you're creating more time within your day to slow down and do these other self-care routines, or just taking time to pause, because you're not having to prepare as many meals and clean up meals. And it creates a pause within the way you're eating, but also more time within the day to maybe slow down and do some of those things that you've been wanting to do or know that you should be doing to maintain your health and well-being.
Well said. Yeah, I mean, eloquently said. I think that's one of the main reasons why I had in the section in the book, the metaphysical meal section of the book, because I knew people were, because I hear this from patients, like, what do I do when I'm not eating? I'm so used to eating, and they eat because they're bored, or they eat because they've always done that, or eat because they're stressed. So if you're doing 2 meals a day and you're getting your calories in later on in the day or wherever you're having your eating window, that can elicit some of uncomfortable because it's something new. Just like you're new to that yoga class. Oh my gosh, like what the heck? So I wanted that bring some acts of stillness and acts of mindfulness in their day so they can use this way. This is so much more than just fasting. It's just like, how can you maybe bring in a journaling practice or a gratitude practice or a breathing exercise or getting out in nature, something to calm the racing egoic mind. That's really what I want to do, to use this as a mindfulness practice, use eating and use fasting windows as a mindfulness practice. That is the real ingredients for authentic intuitive eating.
That makes a lot of sense. And what about when somebody decides to incorporate fasting and maybe they have a wife and kids and a family, and they want to take this on, but maybe their partner hasn't listened to this interview yet, and their partner isn't sold yet, and they're like, That's I've always heard breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and either they aren't willing to necessarily experiment themselves, which could be a challenge, or they give you pushback because they think what you're doing is harmful or it's not, advantageous.
Yeah. Yeah, fasting in many ways is can be triggering to some people. I've seen that on social media. Less with my patients, right? I mean, patients are kind of they're down with feeling better and experimenting things and improving their quality of life. But to the uninitiated on social media, you get everybody's opinions, and it can be triggering to some people. I've seen where they see it on face value, and with rightfully so. I get it. But you have to be open to learning and being curious about what the context of what we're talking about is. Is they say, well, it's an eating disorder. You're advocating disordered eating, and if they really looked beyond the word intermittent fasting, they would know that this is not disordered eating. This is very flexible, very measured, very intermittent. It's nothing extreme at all. It's quite measured. We're talking about slight fluctuations of hours and not long weeks on end of not eating. So that could be somebody's loved ones with the best of intentions response when they hear that word. The people that are listening, they don't know much. They don't know any better. They care for you. They've heard something online and they're worried. So I would just educate them in love like anything else that people do. Just inform them, kindness. And hopefully 9 times out of 10, I would assume they care for you, that when they know better, they do better, and they'll, like Maya Angelou said, and they would be okay with it because they'd see, hey, this is pretty practical. This is like not anything radical by any means. And then sometimes I see this is that friends or family members, that person gets so they get a lot healthier. They're losing inflammation. They've lost weight. If they struggled with weight loss resistance, and if you don't have to lose weight, it's just like improved quality of life. But mainly if someone has to lose weight and they become a fat burner, they lost weight. And then you get like these people that are like, you're getting too skinny or you're too thin. And even though they're not, they're a healthy BMI, they feel great, their energy's great, their labs look great. It's just they're not used to seeing you without inflammation and the extra 20 pounds that they're like, whoa, you look different. And sometimes I think it could be unconscious jealousy a little bit too. It's like, okay, what are you doing? You can't like pass me up. I see that with spouses too sometimes. It's like, he's passing me up or she's passing me up. Like I have to, and they don't understand it. So all of this is, it's fine. People don't understand, and are they open to understanding? Inform them and get them in on it. I see so many times, at least on a clinical level, I see this, is that the spouse will implement protocols like intuitive fasting into their life. Even if their spouse doesn't understand it at first, healthy can be contagious in an amazing way, where you've planted a seed and it may not make sense or grow right away, but then months or years go down the line and it'll click for them. And the seed that you planted will sprout and they'll own it for themselves. The seed will be something that you planted, but that growing bud, that growing plant of wellness will be their own, and sometimes it's not the message, it's the messenger and the time, and we're all on our own journey with these things. So sometimes something doesn't resonate with us at first, but later on it will. It'll make sense. It'll click. And maybe they'll hear it from somebody else, and it'll be the same exact thing that you said, but it'll be like the right messenger at the right time, and it'll be like, I've been saying that for X amount of years. Like, you never listen to me. It happens all the time with my patients and their spouses, and that's okay. It's like you did your part, and then you have to give them the grace to be on their own journey. And I put this intuitive fasting protocol under that same umbrella of a wellness tool that can be used and picked up when you're ready for it.
And you talked about the weight loss there. For somebody that maybe they've lost the weight that they had to lose or wanted to lose, and now they're at a healthy weight, or maybe they're starting fasting and they're already at a healthy weight, is it ever a problem the other way where it's like, oh, my weight, I can't keep my weight on because I want to fast and get these other benefits, but I don't want to, degrade to nothing. So do you ever see that in practice, or is that a thing?
Oh, it can be a thing for deep fasts, for long fasts, for sure. If you are doing like long water fasts, or if somebody has, like, this is a very extreme case. But if you're talking about somebody with inflammatory bowel issues, for example, they're doing long water fasts on their own, or they're doing like it's an elemental diet. It's counterintuitive, but many of those people actually gain weight as they heal their body. And you would think they would lose weight. But the people that have to do those longer fasts, as they heal their gut and heal their body's ability to absorb nutrients, because there's so much malabsorption, maldigestion, things going on, they're actually eating less, but they're actually putting weight on because their body's actually absorbing the nutrients they are taking in. So it's really counterintuitive. The person that shouldn't be doing those longer extreme fasts, theoretically, if they're pushing their body beyond what it should be doing and they shouldn't be doing this fast so much, that's being in a chronic hypocaloric state. That is the antithesis of what we're talking about here. Chronic caloric restriction is not the same as time-restricted feeding and intermittent fasting. So you're still eating amply. So the protocols that I talk about in intuitive fasting, people that don't have to lose weight are not going to be skeletal. They're not going to be malnourished because they're still getting their calories in. They're just getting it in specific windows, and they're not doing it all the time. So it's so intermittent and cyclical. If they don't have to lose weight, they will actually stay weight. They may drop a little bit because of inflammation and water weight, but they're going to stay within a couple pound period basis. And if someone is underweight that's dealing with these chronic inflammatory issues like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's and absorption issues, they will find over time as their body repairs, they will gain a little bit of weight, of healthy weight, of muscle weight. Because keto adaptation and beta-hydroxybutyrate has been shown to be muscle sparing. So actually it helps preserve lean muscle mass. So people that are underweight as far as like they have very low muscle mass, they can preserve that and gain some as they get healthier.
I guess an analogy that comes to mind as you explain that would be adaptogens, where they know if the body's running too high and they need to bring you back to that baseline, or running too low and it brings you up. It sounds like fasting over time is going to find that sweet spot with your weight, whatever way you need to go.
Yeah, very much so. It's that position within the Paracelsus referred to as, because if you're repairing mechanisms, you're repairing mechanisms. So those mechanisms can actually do their job, and you can find a healthy metabolic rate. You can find a healthy weight for you. And if your gut is unhealthy, if you're not absorbing nutrients, or if your hormones are off, or whatever dysfunction's going on, a lot of time it has to do with the gut-brain axis. As you're healing the gut through these flexible fasting windows, you're absorbing nutrients more. So maybe you were underweight and you think, how could flexible fasting ever make me gain weight? Well, it's actually time for your gut to repair, especially when the fasting does that, but also eating healthy foods like this. And I would say, just a little bit of a side note, because the book wasn't for people with gut issues specifically, but I would say to those people, as they are my top patient base, focusing more on the break the fast section of the book. Break the fast section of the book, which is lots of recipes and pretty pictures and that kind of stuff. But break the fast section is lots of soups and stews and broths, to use those more, not just when you break the fast, which is why I put them in the book, because they're gentle on the gut when the villi are short and all of that stuff, to transition you from your fast into eating. But people that have gut issues that are like, I'm underweight, I want to try this flexible fasting to get all the benefits and help reset my gut and lower inflammation and reset the immune system, all that other stuff. One little tweak modification that they could do is having more of those soups and stews in the break the fast recipe section. They would really benefit from. That's an adjustment that I would make clinically if they were my patient.
Let's go a bit deeper into this break the fast concept here. And I'm just curious, when does somebody really need to consider having a specific protocol when they're going to start eating again? How long of a fast would that occur after? And you mentioned the soups there. Is that kind of the type of food, or are there other types of foods that people can use to reintroduce food into the system?
To me, the way that I put it in the book was like 16 hours, they can start to consider that. 18 hours, they can start to consider that. But I'll tell you what, that's being really conservative of me to even say that. In my opinion, the almost OMAD in week 3 that you're doing non-consecutively, by the way, it's every other day in week 3 that you're doing an almost OMAD approach, which OMAD is one meal a day. So it's 22 to 2 fasting to eating windows. And the reason why I'm doing an almost OMAD versus like a traditional 24 to 1 fasting to eating OMAD approach is because there's studies that show that eating that amount of calories in that short period of time can increase or something called the PKR pathway, which is it can increase something what the research calls metaflammation, which is another term for systemic inflammation. So I wanted to avoid that. I know OMAD has a lot of benefits too, but let's do it in a way that's a little bit more sustainable and practical to people, that leverages the benefits of the deeper fast and transitions out appropriately. So a 20 to 22 almost OMAD fasting to eating window is a great way to mitigate the potential metaflammation of the PKR pathway of too much of a tight eating window, but you still get the deeper fast of an almost like a 1.5 meal a day. So to me, in week 3, which is a cellular renewal, where we're working on more of the autophagy and the stem cell and the mitochondrial biogenesis and the deeper longevity, anti-disease, anti-aging pathways. We're doing that non-consecutively too. So keep in mind it's an almost OMAD, then a 12-12, almost OMAD, then a 12-12, for week 3 in the 4 weeks. So on the almost OMAD, in my opinion, out of the 4 weeks, that's where the break the fast makes the most sense. So in the meal plan in the book, I strategically made these break the fast meals more prevalent in that week. The other weeks, talking 12-12, 18-hour fast, I don't think it's that important. If someone has an extra sensitive gut, maybe in week 2 for 18-hour fast, but honestly, I've done this for so long, I really don't think most people need to be that overthinking it that much. But week 3 on the OMAD days, the non-consecutive days, I think that the break the fast meal is a good idea because the villi, the gut, these finger-like, fingers in the gut that help absorb nutrients, et cetera, in the intestinal wall, they're going to be shorter, more blunted. Cortisol is going to be a little bit higher during the fast. That's a normal thing. That's a good thing. It's the hormetic effect, this healthy stress that helps to support all these cellular resilience pathways. You've taken a break from digesting food. So everything's going to be a little bit more, okay, it's been on a siesta mode and you have to wake the gut up gently. You have to wake up your system up gently. So a nice segue, like we're eating now, is a good soup, stew. And we put up recipes in the book so you can see that. Both plant-based soups and stews, as well as bone broth soups and stews in there. It's a good tool. Other ideas beyond that are going to be any soft cooked vegetable. If it's soft, not raw, I think that's another tool with protein that is not too high in fat. You could do wild-caught fish like a salmon. You could do chicken if you wanted to do that. You could do herbs and spices, nothing too spicy, but you could flavor it up appropriately. You can have some fat, but not a super high fat because, again, you want to gently lean your body back into eating mode. And even in the break the fast section, I also mentioned smoothies. I think those can be good too. Theoretically, if you're putting greens in there, that could be raw, but I think the blending up process is so gentle. There's not that much digestion to do there. Or you could just take the greens out and not have so many raw greens in your break the fast smoothie section. And then you're having that break the fast meal, and about an hour or an hour and a half later, you're having your other meal. So you're having your break the fast meal and then a bigger meal to make sure you're getting your calories in that 2 to 4 hour almost OMAD window in week 3 for 3 to 4 days, 3 to 4 non-consecutive days that week.
Thanks for breaking that down. And earlier you talked about using sea salt to replenish electrolytes. I'm just curious, how long of a fast would somebody need to go on before that becomes a real concern? If they're doing like a 12-hour on, 12-hour off, like we talked about in the beginning, is that something they need to be concerned about? Or is that just when they get into like the 14 and beyond kind of length?
They would probably, it depends on how metabolically inflexible they are, but I could see week 1 still being something where I would want to consider electrolytes because we're pairing it with the clean ketogenic diet like Ketotarian, because we're mimicking fasting even with breakfast, lunch, and dinner and eating. So at that point, you're still going to want to bring electrolytes in week one. If you were eating tons of carbohydrates with a 12-12, I agree with you. You wouldn't have to do it then, because that's such a light eating window, and you're basically just fasting through the night. But during the day, you're also working synergistically with the fast at night during the day to lean your body in for week two. That I think some electrolytes would be beneficial for people generally. So if you're adding some Himalayan sea salt or another type of sea salt with water and sipping on that throughout the day, not a bad idea. But keep in mind that the nutrient density of a ketotarian diet is you're getting magnesium, you're getting sodium, you're getting potassium from the food that you're eating too. So, you have to take that into consideration. How much of these nutrient-dense foods are you eating? If you're eating the way that I'm advocating it for, you may not need extra like sea salt water because you're getting your electrolytes, these minerals from your meals and added salt on your meal. So that's something to consider. But week two, yeah, 14 to 18 hour metabolic recharge fast in week two, a little bit more needed. You're getting some electrolytes through the foods that you're eating even then, but it's a tighter fasting window. So that's definitely something that in the morning, if they're doing like a 12 to 6, or if they can adjust that eating window wherever they want to suit with their schedule or their preference. But that 6 to 8 hour eating window is when they are not eating, they may want to sip on some extra electrolyte water during that day, or an electrolyte supplement or something like that.
Got it. And earlier we talked about if family and friends might not be on board or supporting while somebody's introducing fasting into their life. And I just want to come back to that and touch on something that I was thinking about, which could be really important for people. And that's maybe finding a buddy, even if it's not somebody in your family. Maybe you have a friend or somebody in your life that might want to take this on with you, and somebody you can share that experience as you're going through it with them. Or I'm not sure about this, you'd probably know better than me, but there might be online communities where people can get that support and have that sounding board for different things that might come up as they're new to fasting.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that I advocate in the book, is to get a community if you can. If not, I mean, it depends on the personality, right? I mean, some people are introverts and they're fine with doing things solo. Some people need a community and they do way better with a buddy. Humans in general are communal creatures anyway. So more oftentimes than not, even if they are introverted, having that encouragement with somebody could be beneficial. Yes, I agree. Find someone that's going to edify you, that's going to speak life into you, that's going to build you up, that's going to be an encourager to you, that's going to be able to, if you're new, if this is new to you and you're like nervous, you can like vent to them about the things you're thinking about, and it could be amazingly supportive. Speaking of that, I don't know if you knew this or not, but we're starting a private online fasting group for that reason. I mean, anybody that pre-orders intuitive fasting, we have this private group that will be launching shortly after publication, and we're going to keep it launched. It's going to be indefinitely, so people can just get in touch with us on social media, look at the posts that are most recent. I'll be posting about it throughout the weeks and months to come whenever they listen to this conversation to get access to that. So there'll be a whole community of intuitive fasters, but specifically for the book publication. The book comes out February 23rd. After that, a couple weeks after that, because I wanted people to get some time, starting in March and then beyond, we're going to do this every month or so. We'll be having fasting group challenges and people to support each other. And even if you're not doing the fast challenge at the same time as everybody else, you'll still have a community of people that you can lean on, especially this time when people are socially distant and they're not, physically meeting up. I think that these online forums can be really, really a lifeline to people that want that supportive, positive community of like-minded people and people that are different that you can learn from, which is important too, because I think sometimes social media can be so tribal and we have confirmation bias. We only want to go for things that we agree with just to confirm our own tribalism. But you're going to find, just like anything else that we do within fasting, there's so many nuances and so many ways to do it. And that is important because we can learn from things that are different from us too. So yeah, it's that's something that we wanted to build online for everybody.
I had no idea about that, but we'll link it up in the show notes. That's great.
Thanks.
And I know we got to wrap up here, Will, but one thing I think would be really helpful for people, and it would really come full circle on the whole conversation, and this is just so perfect to ask you, because you are a clinician and working with patients and introducing fasting to patients. So what are some of the biggest struggles you see with people as they're embracing fasting for the first time? And what can they do to prevent that?
So what you saying? What they're noticing when they first fast?
Well, no, just like when you're working with your patients, what are you seeing the challenges time and time again, the common challenges people are experiencing, and then how have you helped navigate them through those?
Yeah. So the when I wrote the book, I really, as I was writing through it and rewriting it and like going through it again, third pass, whatever, all the amount of passes I went through that book, I spoke a lot of life into that book. And every time I read through it to add additional things as I was thinking about it, I would think of a different patient over the course of 10 years of consulting people of a question that they had that I hope to clarify it for the reader, because I wasn't there to like clarify things and walk them through it. So hopefully that those years of clinical experience really is breathed in throughout the pages of the book, so they know I'm walking through this whole process with them. And I've seen this done in thousands of people over the course of my time in functional medicine, that I've heard just about every excuse under the book of why someone can't do this. I've heard just about every reason why, every modification we'd have to make to suit the bio-individuality of that person, put that in there too. So it's very much user-friendly and approachable to people. Hopefully that's mitigated. Specifically, I mean, we're managing things so responsively clinically that I'm hopefully getting a firm foundation first and then leaning people into it. So kind of what I said earlier about that week one is that maybe we put a protocol together for a patient and we recommend on this week to go into a deeper fast for them, right? But their body's not there yet. So that's the science and the art of what I do in functional medicine. The science is implementing these protocols, but the art is self-pacing it and saying, okay, meet your body where it's at. So the biggest problem that I see, to answer your question more directly, is someone rushing something and not checking in with their body. So it's okay to rest in the present moment and be slower than you think you should be, if that's where your body's telling you need to go, meaning that checking with your energy, checking in with your digestion, checking in with how you're feeling, check in with your stress around something new. Starting that yoga class can be stressful. Does that mean you go into an advanced yoga class like the next day? Maybe you need to like rest in this and get better at this practice without progressing. Even if the progression is arduous to you, like even if it's slow and incremental, you're still leaning into it. And that's what I would say the biggest thing is people rushing something because they think more is always better overnight, and it's not always the case. So meet your body where it's at, show up for yourself, and check in with yourself to see when you should lean into it beyond where you're at right now. Because it's just not a race that has to be done overnight. These are tools that I want people to integrate sustainably for themselves, to just integrate core things that you won't ever have to drop. It will just be something that you've picked up, that you find a way that really works for you, and you'll have those tools for the rest of your life. So there's no rush. There's no need to rush through this. So I think that's the biggest message that I would say that I have seen done with patients that are very ambitious, very excited, but sometimes get ahead of themselves. And that's okay. You learn from those moments too.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. And Will, other than listeners and viewers getting a copy of Intuitive Fasting, how can they connect with you after the show?
Thank you, my friend. Everything's at drwillcole.com. That's drwillcole.com, on Instagram at Dr. Will Cole, all that stuff. Yeah, everything's there.
All right, it's all going to be linked up over in the show notes. Congrats on book number 3.
Thanks, buddy.
Is there any plans for another book, or are you going to be taking a little bit of a break, or do you know at this time?
Well, my literary agent, she's amazingly sweet. She's like, well, what's the next book idea? I'm like, Heather, let's just give this some time. Because my day job will always be, for the indefinite future, my patients. Like that's my main focus. So everything's secondary to them and obviously my family, but like professionally, my clinical practice comes first. So that's what I am doing 10 hours a day. And then things like this, I love talking to you, are peppered in between those consultations via webcam. So 2021, I don't know. I don't know if I'll be working on a book at least the beginning half of 2021. I think I'll take some time off just focusing about intuitive fasting and my patients. But maybe the end of the year, yes, there will be another book and I have some ideas, but I'll keep you posted.
All right. Well, I look forward to seeing what that is, and I'm sure we'll chat again. Thank you, Will.
Thank you, sir.